it's kind of unusual to have it, and it's highly unusual to have one following the other. What I would always say though, in these situations, it's usually the problem is usually with the opposition. And when you had your situation in St. Lucia, the challenge was that the UWP couldn't identify a leader of any substance, and people were tired and they wanted an alternative, and they saw Kenny Anthony as that person. Prime Minister Moore continues to be that person, and I would think that the difference here is that the normally the flow is disrupted by no pun intended, of course, your sponsors, but that flow is disrupted normally by an opposition that is saleable. And the challenge that we have had is that we've had two elections in which there has been no reasonable opposition, and as a result, Prime Minister Mottley has sailed home. So one could argue that Barbados is becoming Motley country, kind of, but one could also argue that the challenge is that we really do lack an opposition, and the moment that we get a good opposition lead, it's possible that that flow will be broken.
We'll talk about how the strength of a solid opposition can change the landscape moving forward. But let's go back a bit, Peter. The first Mia Mottley government installed in May of 2015, it was cut short by a snap election, then forced by internal matters within the political party. Fears this time around that there can be a recurrence?
Yeah, I mean, what you said, you said that to me yesterday, and I think that that's highly incorrect. That is an assessment that is founded on social media and social media rumors. I'm relatively closer to the administration, and I can't say that I saw any evidence of the fact that it was under any internal pressure to call the last election. My sense is that the last election was called largely because the Prime Minister saw an opportunity, an opening, and she felt that it would be useful to exploit that opportunity, politically shrewd, I would think, to do so. We've had early elections in the Caribbean before, and invariably it's a situation where the Prime Minister sees an opportunity that they want to exploit. Grenada did a similar thing. It didn't work out as well for him, but I think that in her case it did. These rumors of internal dissent are founded on really people who don't understand the nature of Westminster politics and the way that it works. The argument that 4 or 5 people could have caused her to go to the election early because they were prepared to go to the president and ask for an alternative reflects a lack of knowledge and understanding regarding how our system works, because no 4 or 5 people can dislodge a prime minister. A leader of the opposition, yes, but not a prime minister, because that's not how our system works. So my feeling this time around is that the reality of her trying to make changes and so on, it has nothing to do with any internal wrangling. It has everything to do with the fact that she's just trying to get a good fit because the circumstances have changed and she feels that she needs to address those.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Her quest to get a good fit. What is you are sold that that is the main reason for this latest reshuffle.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are a couple of arguments that one can bring, and I agree entirely that it seems soon. We had a previous administration where changes were made in a year. This would have been fairly early in the game. The problem is that if you need to move someone, then you have to shuffle everyone around, and there's a feeling that the Prime Minister has been wanted to make changes that reflect a level of professionalization. So, for example, she needs to deal with crime, and she wants to move that ministry closer to her. So as a result, she's had to make a change where crime is concerned and to have a person who is essentially a crime prevention minister within her ministry. That was one of the changes. Some of the other changes to me are essentially achieving what a lot of us thought was logical a long time ago. So we have a tourism professional in the parliament. He is now becoming tourism minister. We have a medical doctor, a surgeon no less, who was Minister of Health before. He's taken back over as Minister of Health. Those are the kind of changes I think that reflect this idea of getting a good fit. And we can argue, yes, that it is fairly early and that she knew all of this 9 months ago.
I was going to go there. Because
it's what it is.
I was going to go there, Peter, because some of her distractors would say perhaps a lack of foresight. You're only in for 9 months. You should have had, or you had all this information prior in making the composition of your cabinet. So, but you saying to me there are no underlying factors. She's just strengthening government and getting the right fit.
Yeah. The other thing that I think circumstances have changed significantly. The crime situation was not as bad as it was when we had the last election. And then in relation to health, she had a health minister on the last occasion that was genius, quite frankly, and he did an outstanding job. This is Lieutenant Colonel Bostic. He's now retired from politics, and he was replaced by someone who has a background in tourism. No, I don't know whether the assessment of the performance suggested that there was greater muscle that was needed, perhaps. But it's difficult to say that you can have foresight in relation to these things when circumstances present themselves that are somewhat different.
Thanks for balancing the argument there. Peter, Sheriff, what's your crime situation in Bridgetown and across Barbados?
It's been bad. We've been having murders, one left, right, and center. The numbers I'm not aware of, but it's almost every day that you open the newspaper and you're seeing murders. There was one that took place the other day, right in the full gaze of security cameras. Kind of a kidnapping situation that turned bad and the person was shot. It's clear that there is some gang activity and drug activity, and that's creating some problems. And the police have said that they have reason to believe that it's internal, where the drug gangs are fighting for turf, and as a result, they're taking out people. So we've had quite a few of this type of execution-style murders. One of them took place in a very public way, and there is concern that this is really something that has to be arrested.
Extremely brazen, similar to what we experience here on St. Lucia. Peter, just let me ask you to make a slight adjustment in your positioning. I think the sunrise is now making its way into your domain.
There we go.
That's a lot better. Thanks for that.
Sorry about that.
The current situation, gang related apparently, as you're saying, similar to what we're facing here on St. Lucia. Brazen attacks, 54 now, the count on St. Lucia. Perhaps my producers are saying if you can just close the blind, that would solve the problem.
Okay. All right. Well, let me just go off screen a bit, and I'll start it out.
Thanks for that. Peter Wickham is my very special guest, and he's joining me from Barbados. Again, the Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, announcing changes to her cabinet. We often refer to it as a reshuffle, but there are really changes to her cabinet, and according to the noted regional poster, it is to make government strengthen. You're most welcome, Peter. It is better. Thanks for the adjustment. The current situation, Mr. Wickham, it's not unique to Barbados. We have a similar crime problem here, but your situation will be perhaps an extremely difficult job for the incoming National Security Minister.
Right. Well, this gentleman, Corey, he's in national security. We have a Minister of Home Affairs, and he's unchanged. We have an Attorney General, and he's unchanged. For all intents and purposes, and then the National Security Minister is the Prime Minister, I believe. This new minister is one that's supposed to do with crime prevention, and I think it's useful to spend a bit of time looking at his background. Okay. Corey Lane is a social activist. One could argue that he has very good contacts with the at-risk groups, and he had a fairly good project some years ago where he took at-risk kids off the street and he got them into horse riding and different other activities, agriculture and whatnot. And many of them were occupied with that, and as a result became less likely to fall victim to crime. My sense is that this is the type of thing that I presume he will be doing in the office of the Prime Minister, where he is not a minister of national security, but certainly he is dealing with initiatives that can help preoccupy or occupy persons that are at risk, identifying persons who are at risk in the first place to fall victim to crime, and helping them deal with the situation. One of the challenges is a lack of opportunities. That really is one of the things that causes crime. And we've found over the years that persons who are working, persons who are employed, persons who have a vocation, they're making money, they're raising children and they're looking after their family and so on, are less likely to get involved in crime. The challenge is that for a lot of people, that is not possible, and as a result, the crime situation continues to be problematic.
Yeah. Let's talk about those opportunities which you just started maybe lacking, because they may be some value for us here. in some of those recommendations. Because the argument, and when you listen to St. Lucians speak, the argument against that, Peter, is that a lot of the persons involved in criminal activity, they possess very valuable belongings as well. The gold chains, the excessive spends on the vehicles. So what sort of opportunities are they really looking for, and can our societies and government realistically present and guarantee those opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, you're making a valid point, because we look at the typical criminal, one could say, and the person gets arrested and they're wearing gold chains and they have expensive cell phones. You look at these trappings, and the presumption is that these are the trappings which are associated with wealth. The reality is that these are usually social indicators that mean nothing other than the fact that you're trying to say to people that you do have wealth. And I mean, some of the wealthiest people don't do that type of thing. And usually it is more a signal that you're sending to someone to try and prove a point. If you look at our crime situation in Barbados, or our criminal situation in Barbados, you can trace the academic background of every person at the criminal institution, the penal institution. And invariably, none of them have probably more than 2 CXCs. Some of them don't have any CXCs, and they've never had a job. They come out of school without a lot of opportunities. What some criminologists determined some time ago is that many of them have learning disabilities. And as a result, they haven't been able to learn in the traditional system. They've been thrown out of it. And essentially, they find a way to make do. Now, I myself have a learning disability. I've been able to cope with it quite well. But the difference is that I had the benefit of supportive parents and the necessary resources to be able to combat the disability that I have. I'm dyslexic. Now, the challenge is that I've seen persons have a similar challenge that are born into backgrounds where they don't have that support, and they end up as part of the system. Because I tell you, it's very frustrating to be in a class with your peers and unable to compete, feeling as though there's nothing in that environment for you. If you give people those opportunities, and you give people the opportunity to identify what they're good at and work with it in that way, and you create opportunities for people, and the likelihood of them falling into the criminal trap it doesn't come up. Many of these gangs are like parental structures. So what you don't get from parents, you get from a gang, and it's like a family, and invariably it works that way. So the idea is create opportunities for young people to ensure that none of them feel as though the system is casting them out. They're engaged in something. If you're interested in becoming a plumber, or you're interested in graphic design, you go and you do that, and invariably you are likely to get to the stage where you're more interested in saying, I meet a nice girl, I want to raise a family. The gold chain and the thing will become less important in time, because your priorities change. And I think that really is it's a social process. It doesn't happen quickly, but I think what you're seeing in St. Lucia, what you're seeing in Barbados, is a reflection of the fact that opportunities are lacking for many of the people who end up at risk. And the idea of an at-risk teen is essentially someone who is likely to become involved in that type of activity because of their situation.
So perhaps the idea should be programs which promote deterrence, and it's targeted at saving, Peter, the next generation. So you don't have them being attracted by the gangs, but you put them in programs which keep them excited and keep them focused, so to speak. And perhaps it's a whole different game for the season and now criminals.
No, I mean the part is also interesting. In St. Kitts and Nevis, they did an interesting thing in St. Kitts and Nevis with their crime situation. Of course, St. Kitts and Nevis had a crime situation that was off the charts as well. Similar problems to what we had in Barbados. And what they did was they essentially employed a lot of the criminals, directly employed a lot of the criminals, and crime dropped significantly. Now, it was controversial because the argument is, why are you paying people not to commit crimes? Essentially, you're paying criminals, and they're law-abiding taxpayers that would like to get some of that money and can't. So that becomes controversial. I'm not saying by any chance that this is what we plan to do in Barbados, but I'm just saying that in the case of St. Kitts and this. They have also experimented with something similar. The former Deputy Prime Minister, Sean Richards, he was very much involved in the program, and it worked. I mean, it was controversial, but it worked because it essentially meant that you were employing persons constructively to ensure that they didn't employ themselves destructively.
Perhaps, Peter, the final verdict on that St. Kitts initiative is still out, pending, because some people say it was the political strategies, and perhaps the criminals felt comforted to down weapons in support of the administration of the day. So with a new government at the helm, it will be interesting to see if that program is continued, and if not, how the situation unfolds there.
That would be interesting. I agree.
Yeah.
That would be interesting.
In Barbados, and just one more from me on crime before we talk the cabinet move. Time now for us to deal with this situation, this problem from a regional perspective, and what's holding us back?
What problem on a regional perspective? The crime
situation, correct?
I'm not sure if we can, because the idea of criminals moving from one island to the other and whatnot. I don't really know that it is something that we can stop. And I don't know that we are, to be perfectly honest, I think all we end up doing when we attempt to do these things is we end up making it difficult for me to come to see you in St. Lucia, or you to come and see me in Barbados, as distinct from making it hard for criminals. I don't believe that it's really something that we can tackle regionally. My feeling has always been that the liberalization of the marijuana environment is an important part of it, because a lot of our crime and drugs is related to the ganja trade. And my feeling is always the Antigua model and the Trinidad and Tobago model that allows people who want to consume ganja to grow it in their own house, in their own backyard. I think that model makes a lot of sense. So to me, if we have a regional push in that direction, we already had a CARICOM Commission study on ganja, which I'm happy that we were able to do research on behalf of. But there's a feeling that if we were able to get that going, and in St. Lucia, we found a majority of people supported decriminalization. At the regional level, there would be less of this interregional trade of ganja and the need to protect it with guns and that type of thing. The St. Vincent connection in many instances is a huge problem where that is concerned. And where you have large quantities of valuable drugs, you basically will also have to have guns to protect them. My idea is, if you have a situation where, ganja is not the kind of product that requires any big complex production. People will dry it and smoke it. And if people can do that on a home basis, it will make a whole lot of difference to the crime situation. The numbers of people who are locked up in the Caribbean for crime, if we erase that category of crime, I think that would be enough. But regionally, that's the only thing I can think of that we can do. Otherwise, we have to tackle it locally.
How about Peter as well? And that's very interesting, the recommendation and that you're making, how we can maybe free up so many of these individuals who are locked up, and the possibility of people being locked up not just for growing ganja, but for the other elements associated, because as you rightfully said, if there's a large quantity of drug with value being produced, there's the need to secure it, and that's where the firearms come in and the associated problems. Perhaps, Peter, from the angle of us sharing resources, you may have expertise in Barbados that we don't have in our police force, and you hear the stories all the time, whereas they may be the expertise within the police force, these same people walk the communities and our families with some of the criminals. So perhaps from the angle of sharing and exporting our various resources.
But this is what they did in Bermuda many years ago. You bring St. Lucians and Barbadians to police Bermuda because they're less likely to know the criminals personally. I guess that's a model that can work. But my thing is that we already shared resources. The Ganja Commission was headed by Rosemary Antoine, who is a St. Lucian. I believe she's a St. Lucian. Yeah, she's a St. Lucian. Not by birth, but by attrition, one could say. And we worked together as a team. We had people from all over the region, and we came up with this recommendation that said we should liberalize as quickly as possible, and ganja should be treated as a controlled drug like alcohol, for example. And you protect minors and so on. otherwise let people do what they have to do. So I think we're sharing resources on that level. The idea of regional policing is something that I think is a great idea, but it hasn't ever really worked quite well. I mean, the regional security system has become a bit of a burden on some of the countries, and I don't think that it works the way it's supposed to work in terms of sharing intelligence and that type of thing. I mean, let's face it, most of the crime that is committed in St. Lucia is nothing that you need a regional person to be able to discover. And one of the things I like about the region is that invariably crimes, you identify the person that committed the crime, and that person is placed before the courts. You have a lot of unsolved murders in the Caribbean simply because of the fact that we're all living close together. And crimes, generally speaking, especially with all of these cameras around, invariably you can find the person and prosecute them. One of the challenges we had in Barbados is that sometimes the witnesses became either disinterested or they conveniently forgot details. And that's a situation in some instances where the criminals or criminal associates get to the witnesses and persuade them not to remember things that they remembered. No, I don't know that that's something that we can deal with regionally, but that seems to be one of the challenges, and I think that St. Lucia would have that problem as well.
Absolutely. Peter, you would agree if we stay on crime, we might be here for another hour or two. So let's move on, because there's so much on crime and so many recommendations I'm sure you can bring forward. Let's move on and get back to the matter, why you call her. In Barbados, that reshuffle, what has been the general response from government and from the general public in Barbados?
Yeah, well, I mean, government is easy. Government has said nothing. They haven't commented on it, and certainly there's another scandal that emerged around the same time that has made it difficult for government to comment properly on it. I think the response from the opposition has been that it was unprovoked, unjustified, and unnecessary, and that it won't change anything. And I think the phrase that is often used is like shuffling around the deck chairs on the Titanic. I think that reference is kind of overused, but usually that's what the opposition said. In the case of the public, I think that, like what you said earlier, many of the members of the public are asking why so soon. What is the reason for it so soon, and why is the Prime Minister second guessing herself, which she not have had the foresight to know before what things would have happened, and the questions as to why. I think that those are reasonable questions, and I don't believe that government has answered them, or alternatively will try to answer them, because the position has always been that it is the Prime Minister's purview, and if something isn't working, she has to fix it. If she doesn't fix it, then she has to be held accountable for not fixing it. So that's basically the lay of the land. The other more significant scandal on the topic of Barbados now is the fact that one of our MPs has been charged with rape, and I think that has essentially knocked the wind out of several sails. Personally, I believe it may have had a lot to do with why the Cabinet Reshuffle was announced when it was announced, because I got a sense that it was something that was in the works for a while. But the need to strip that individual of any parliamentary responsibility outside of him being an MP would have required some changes, and as such, there was a full suite of changes that were announced, and perhaps, as I said, brought forward. But that really is the news over the past couple of days. We only have all the members of Parliament are members of the Barbados Labour Party. So of course it's a BLP person that's been charged, and it's uncomfortably with people, I must tell you. Yeah.
Let's talk about that just for a bit. It's now a legal matter, so there are various areas that we cannot go into. But just to confirm for our viewers who may not be aware, that individual, that member of Parliament, has been stripped of all ministerial portfolios, correct?
Right, but he was never a minister in the first place. He was a minister before. So I think he was a junior minister. Yeah, he was a junior minister before. He had been stripped of that responsibility even before the election. Okay. And his assignment was that of deputy speaker. And like your deputy speaker in St. Lucia, ours doesn't work particularly hard. Our parliament meets probably more regularly than your parliament meets, but invariably the speaker is in the chair, so there's not a whole lot for the deputy speaker to do. And in our case, that was his situation. But he was deputy speaker, and he's been stripped of that post. The person, Cynthia Ford, who is a former minister, elder, member of parliament, she now takes up the role of deputy speaker. So for the time being, he is off the table. The question as to whether he should resign, because I mean, we're talking about the legal issues, has come up and been discussed a lot. I am persuaded that it is inappropriate to do that just yet, because I do feel that, like anyone else, he needs to be given the benefit of fair trial and the opportunity to face his accuser and to respond to the charges. If he is convicted, then of course it's a different matter. But if he is not convicted, he is acquitted, then there's no reason why he shouldn't carry on as smartly as he did before. There's a precedent that is pretty important for us to remember. Recently, Dr. Brown in this is not Prime Minister Brown, but one of the ministers whose name is also Brown. Dr. Brown in Antigua and Barbuda, he was charged with rape, and sadly, mercifully, it was less public than this gentleman's indictment. And he successfully defended the case, and he has been exonerated, with full protection. And now he is returned to the ministry. He was stripped of his ministry, but now he's returned to a similar ministry, and he continues to be a minister and to represent the people. And the feeling on the ground in St. Lucia is that he was hard done. So you have to give the possibility that this could be the case, even as you appreciate the possibility that it could happen in a different direction. So my thing is, I understand why he couldn't continue as deputy speaker. So you say, relieve him of those responsibilities, you say hands off, defend yourself with the greatest vigor that you can. And if things work out for you, then, we continue smartly. And I tell you, Dr. Brown has gained a bump politically as a result of that, because, there are a lot of people, especially the women in the constituency, that feel that he was hard done. And, as a result, he's gained a lot of support as a result. So it's not the end politically for this gentleman.
Yeah, but let's talk the process, and I tend to agree with you that there is a process that we must follow and respect in not just in this matter, because he's a public official, but in private matters as well. Let's talk the process, though, Peter. If indeed it goes through the courts and he is found culpable and guilty, what next? Based on our system of governance, he would be asked to resign, or would it automatically force a by-election in his constituency?
My understanding of the way that it works in our system is that you really can't force an MP to resign, because they're elected by the people. If he were incarcerated, one could argue that if he is convicted, he would have a moral compulsion to resign. And I mean, I think in the case of Dr. Brown, he said that had he been convicted, he would have resigned from Parliament. I'm sorry, just from the ministry. In the case of my understanding of the Westminster system is that you can't really force an MP to resign, because that person is employed by the people and elected by the people. If, however, he were incarcerated and forced to remain away from Parliament for an extended period of time, Parliament could declare him vacant. So let's just say he was to go rogue and say, I've been convicted and I'm not resigning. If after he has not been in Parliament for a period, then the Speaker can declare his seat vacant and they can call a by-election. But my sense is that any politician worth his salt who is convicted of such a matter would probably want to resign, even if he didn't attract a custodial sentence. Even if he had some kind of probation or there was some other kind of legal treatment, he probably would be uncomfortable being in Parliament. Bearing in mind that, a parliamentarian is someone that you have to have trust and confidence in. The person comes in your house and so on. I don't know whether in St. Lucia that's the way it works, but I know in Barbados, people are very cozy with the members of Parliament. So it is not unusual to see a member of Parliament having lunch at someone's house. And the question is, would a person who has been convicted of an offense like that be comfortable in those kinds of scenarios? And I tend to think not. So I do agree, let's wait to see. But certainly if it were to go badly for him, I believe it would be difficult for him not to walk away from it.
In St. Lucia, Peter, citizens are most cozy with the leaders during a specific period of time. We call it the season, the election season. I just wanted to fit that.
I said that jokingly because I know St. Lucia politics well. I understand the extent to which Caribbean politics is cozy on the whole. It's one of the things I like about it, that you can be a member of parliament, you can pop up at someone's house, have a drink socially and that kind of thing. That is the nature of how we roll in the Caribbean.
Yeah. One of these surprises coming out, and it's echoing from that reshuffle announced by Minister Mottley Peter. Your Education Minister, Kay McConney, her portfolio was, to many, not touched in this cabinet reshuffle. Surprising because she is still embroiled in somewhat of a lesser controversy.
Yeah. No, I mean, let's deal with the controversy first and get it out of the way.
Yeah.
You know, you've ever heard the phrase "much ado about nothing," and that's essentially what it is. We have a community in Barbados that is right-wing Christian and particularly motivated to become involved in government, and you know they've been making a nuisance of themselves. Now, I took a position when this thing happened that it was totally inappropriate for those questions to be included. I have not heard a single person that has said that those questions should have been included on the survey in the way that they were included. So the minister, the prime minister, the same Christian community, everyone agrees that, you know, the Ministry of Education dropped the ball. Having said that, if you go beyond that point and argue, one, is it the first time the Ministry of Education has dropped the ball? The answer is definitely no. Is it the last time the Ministry of Education will drop the ball? And let's hope that it will be the last time they drop the ball. But my thing is that I am not convinced that the minister needs to resign based on the circumstances that are presented to me. We have had 2 occasions in Barbados in which children whose their parents sent them to school were killed in Barbadian schools. We had one in the 1980s, and then we had one last year, I believe, where a young boy was killed in a school in Barbados. To me, that requires a far more harsh treatment of a minister who stands in local parentis than is the current situation. And yet still no minister resigned under those circumstances. We've had incidents where public service vehicles have maimed children. We had one just recently where a child was maimed by a public service vehicle right outside the Ministry of Education. And persons like myself, for example, feel that children have no right on those vehicles or no right anywhere close to those vehicles. And the continuing idea of putting them on those vehicles daily is dangerous to children's well-being. And you know, I've been saying this since the 1980s when the first incident occurred. Sorry, 1990s when the first incident occurred and somebody was killed on one of those public service vehicles going to school. So to me, the idea that this is novel is silly. There were 4 questions that were asked that were inappropriate that shouldn't have been in there. To the best of my knowledge, none of the children who were supposed to have been traumatized have made representations regarding the content or the extent of their trauma. And, you know, a lot of the children who did the thing don't even remember the questions in the first place. But it doesn't make it any less appropriate. So against that background, it's hard to frame a conversation that said that Kay McConney should lose her job.
Yeah.
Because while we all agree that the situation was unfortunate, I don't believe that she knew. There's evidence that the ministry objected. And there's also evidence that the objection of the ministry was ignored by the IADB and the questions were included notwithstanding. So people who are expecting her to be moved, you know, I think that it's not going to happen because there are not a lot of people in Barbados who are convinced that she's done something deserving of being moved, although the opposition would like to frame the narrative in that way. I can also give you a more simple response, and I can tell you this is a place to St. Lucia, Barbados, you know, all across the Caribbean. One of the surest ways to ensure that a minister does not get fired is by calling for that minister to be fired. Once you find the opposition leader or opposition person calling for the head of a minister, that minister is safe. And invariably, that's what happens all the time. So, for example, when the former Minister of Finance, who was alleged to have wrecked the Barbados economy, somewhat like Liz Truss did in the United Kingdom, we held a march in Barbados and 20,000 people marched for his neck. You know, we wanted to have him fired, and that was the argument. And I knew as a political analyst that the last thing the Prime Minister was going to do was fire him, because once you do that, you make a minister safe. So we had a march on Saturday against her. And my thing is, the more people march, the more I can assure you that she will not be fired, because in our Westminster tradition, invariably, when you have a situation like this, where a person's neck is being called for, the Prime Minister will never deliver that neck, because the Prime Minister would essentially be abdicating her responsibility to run the government to the office opposition to let the opposition make decisions.
Yeah, and you correct, Peter. You're not just speaking from your head. There's real evidence all across the region of this. Yet still, you have political factions making those calls consistently, knowing well, full well. But it makes for good headlines. Maybe makes for good news headlines.
I will go further than that, because there were some people that suggested that the reason that we had the marches against Chris Sinclair were simply because the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition at the time, who is now Prime Minister, were known to be good friends with him, and she was trying to help out a friend and protect him from what was coming. And the reality is that obviously it worked, because he kept his job right up until the very end. So there you have it.
Yeah. Final on the Cabinet Reshuffle, Peter, and historically we referred to these things as Cabinet Reshuffles, giving it a negative connotation, so to speak. And it has somewhat scared a lot of prime ministers before Prime Minister Mottley in not wanting to move around their ministers. The move by Prime Minister Mottley here 9 months into this new term, and decisive move to act on the Deputy Speaker controversy as well. What lessons are there for current governments in the Caribbean, particularly new ones?
Well, let's be fair to one Prime Minister who is in an admirable position. He's done pretty much the same thing, because he asked one of his own from the Senate just recently on principle, and it's a principle that I support. So one could argue that you can do this type of thing, but the same thing about your Prime Minister, Mr. Jean-Pierre, and our Prime Minister have in common is that they both have political capital. And I would go further and say they have political capital to spare. That's really the reason why you would see them making moves as decisive as this, because when you're in a situation you have a comfortable majority, you can I don't know, in cricketing terms, you can swing the bat while and not worry about being missing, because in the final analysis, if one drop, you still have a team of several more. She has 30 seats, so she can take chances that others would not have taken, and I think that has been characteristic of her administration. She took us into the Republic, which was very controversial. She took down Nelson's statue, which was equally controversial. She banned alcohol during COVID, which was extremely controversial. So there have been a number of things that she has been willing to do, like reshuffling the cabinet frequently, calling an early election. The proposal to have same-sex civil unions in Barbados, again, that has been controversial. So, but you can do all of these things when you know that you have the benefit of substantial political capital. And what is the most important thing is that Prime Minister Mottley has indicated that she is considering retirement after this term. So if it is that you're not too concerned that you won't get elected, maybe you can give yourself the latitude of doing the right thing under the circumstances, and that's what she feels she needs to do.
Yeah, thanks. For Prime Minister Mottley, you get a sense that there is already that leadership succession plan in place?
Yeah, I mean, there are, 3 senior ministers. One of them is, one could say, from the old school, and he was never really very supportive of Prime Minister Mottley. He was very critical of her. He's a senior minister. The other senior minister is a younger person, which is Santia Bradshaw. That person was Carrie Simmons. And she is, one could say, she seems more favored. She's a deputy prime minister. But my sense is that the signal is being sent that leadership conversations have to take place between these two people. And I like the fact that, we don't have a lot of prime ministers doing that. So yes, one of them is deputy, the other one is senior minister. The other 2 senior ministers are quite old, and one presumes that they would not be part of the conversation. But it's good, I think, that a signal is being sent that, look, this is something that could happen.
Yeah, but Prime Minister Mottley is viewed as a model leader. We still had the UN General Assembly. We still had the COP, Conference of Parties on Climate Change as well. How much would we be losing? It's her own prerogative as to when she decides to bow out, but how much would we be losing as a Caribbean in terms of her leadership and guidance, if indeed this is her final term?
I don't agree that there is any loss. What I think the benefit will be that we will have a model. When Nelson Mandela decided that he was not going to go for a 3rd term, and he said he wanted to bow out of politics into retirement. I thought it was unfortunate for South Africa because I felt that he was the glue that held a lot of things together. But when I look at the larger picture, I see a model example of an outstanding leader who said it is equally important to govern as it is important to know when it is time to leave. And one of the challenges I've had in the Caribbean is that we have too few leaders that understand when the time is up to leave. Look at the situation. We have former Prime Minister Keith Mitchell, who is clearly in of advanced age, and I think he was Prime Minister for 25 years. He just lost government in Grenada. Arguably, that could have been avoided if he went. You had the situation with Patrick Manning, who went on and on. Even in your own St. Lucia, Compton came back when he clearly should not have come back, and he ended up dying in office. And then you had Dr. Anthony on the other side, who served 2 terms and then decided to persist beyond. Now that he is no longer there, look, the St. Lucia Labour Party has blossomed under the leadership of an alternative person. And the point is that part of the challenge across the region, and I work in this field, is that we have a lot of leaders who have been outstanding, but you stay at the crease battling for too long. And that's the challenge. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Gonzalez, someone who I admire greatly as being one of the most outstanding leaders of that generation. But again, after 5 terms, how much more can you do in terms and deliver in terms of development? And it creates a problem for people who love him, as I do, also love the idea of a system that says you come, you serve 2 terms, and you move on like the Americans do. And I have always been a supporter of a 2-term system and term limits for leaders, and I feel that leaders come and serve 2 terms. If Prime Minister Mottley exits when she has no good reason to, because she could easily win another election, but she decides notwithstanding to exit, I think what she would bequeath to the region is a model similar to that of Nelson Mandela that says, I came, I saw, I conquered, and I moved on. And maybe that is a model that we should all learn what to do. You have your agenda, you know what you want to achieve politically. You go into parliament, you make the changes, you achieve what you have to achieve. We now have a republic under her. We have other fundamental changes that have come. And then after that, you retire and you give the opportunity for the party to choose someone else who can carry it to the next phase. And the idea of having, like Cynthia Bradshaw, for example, is a person who is a generation younger. I would have different ideas about what needs to be done, and perhaps she can bring you an exciting ideas to the fore.
What the Mia Mottley model has shown is that it is different, because for many leaders there is something which keeps them drawn to the realms of power. But as you say, after serving for so long, what more can you do that you haven't yet done?
But this is something I feel we need to approach regionally, because if you look at it, Peter Patterson is the only leader of the Caribbean that has retired. Right? Most of the other ones are beaten to submission, but they don't retire. PJ Patterson resigned with his boots on. He left office and he has stayed retired. But the vast majority of them either die in office or something else of that nature. And the reality is that once you're Prime Minister of St. Lucia, what else can you possibly do that is important? There's no other job that comes close, and this is the problem that I believe Prime Minister Mottley will have too. After you are Prime Minister of Barbados, is the amount of power you have as Prime Minister of a small country. It's extremely difficult after that to match it anywhere that you go, and therein lies the challenge.
Yeah, definitely, it lies a challenge, and it's a discussion that we can have at a later date, and tie it into the benefits of a 2-term limit for us in the Caribbean, and how we can progress regionally towards that reality. A few more before we wind down. The time on the clock is before us. Your assessment, sir? We've had recent changes in St. Kitts and Nevis, in Grenada as well, and here in St. Lucia. Let's start in Castries. Your assessment of the administrations across those borders?
All right. Well, I think that the changes were to some extent predictable. There is a flow regarding natural disasters, and in the wake of a natural disaster, invariably governments will retain office. So Ralph Gonzalez went in that period and he retained. We had an election in Barbados and they retained. Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica. You had all of those elections and St. Kitts where you had an increased majority. Because the natural reaction to a disaster is usually one in which you say, well, let's keep the government. And that means the same for COVID and a hurricane. So when you came down to the tail end of the disaster now, as happened in the case of St. Lucia, it was entirely unsurprising that the Prime Minister would have lost. I think that the spectacular fashion in which he lost was the part that was surprising. But the fact that he would have lost wasn't unsurprising because already by that time we had indication in terms of other elections that the situation was going south. And we had election before him in Cayman Islands. There's one in the US, and in all cases they ended disastrously for the administration. So that's basically how they get there. As to how they have been performing, I am not comfortable judging the performance of Philip J. At this stage, because I do feel that he needs more time to have been able to do what he is supposed to be doing or to prove himself. People have been rushing to judgment on Dickon Mitchell, for example, in Grenada, because he hasn't been doing a whole lot. But I also think that it's difficult, especially in the COVID pandemic, where your options are very limited, to pass judgment on a person that. I mean, I have a lot of time for Prime Minister Pierre, who I think has been waiting in the wings for a long time, and unfortunately has inherited leadership at a particularly bad time in St. Lucia and Barbadian's history. So my thing is, just give him a chance and see how things shape up. I do know that he hasn't acted to stop a lot of the infrastructural projects that have been going. And I think that that's something that has disappointed many supporters of the St. Lucia Labour Party. But for me, I understand the fact that, as a responsible government, it's easier said than done to just say, okay, you're going to stop this and stop that. So that's something he will struggle with and he will grapple with, and I think his supporters would have their own ideas. But by and large, I do feel it is still too early, especially within the context of the COVID pandemic, to judge any of the leaders, Dickon Mitchell, Prime Minister Pierre, any of them, even the incoming Prime Minister in St. Kitts and Nevis, to judge any of them too harshly, because I think they need time to, get themselves settled and so on, and let's get past this pandemic, and then we see what happens.
You see, the thing is, Peter, and you appreciate it as well, economic circumstances that the global situation has brought on to many of our citizens, and the heavy bag of promises which were carried on those election trails, the citizens of these countries don't have much time to give. That perhaps is the problem.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a fact, the going into the last election in Barbados, the government wasn't promising a whole lot, but going into the last election, the opposition was promising a whole lot in terms of their ability to turn things around. I mean, people didn't take them on, but had people taken them on, you would have a government that is basically in office now and expected to deliver all manner of things. And, I keep saying in terms of my analysis, and whenever I do it, I'm criticized of saying that I'm partial to government. But the problems that you have in St. Lucia are no different to the problems that we have in France, where I live, are no different to the problems that the people in the United Kingdom are struggling with. And the reason why they're changing prime ministers like people change their underwear is simply because the prime ministers all inherit the same problems, and people are not willing to give them the opportunity to try to deal with those issues. The UK is a good example. The UK problem is Brexit. Their problem economically is they should never have left the European Union, and now they have done so. They've done it at the worst possible time, and they have to deal with the consequences. The Conservative Party should be punished for having convinced people to do so, but it is what it is. But they will expect every leader to come in now and work miracles. And across the region, we've been having the same thing. So your prime minister's issues and my prime minister's issues are the same. The price of oil is $100 a barrel or something in that vicinity. In an environment like that, where energy is critical to everything, St. Lucia doesn't generate power other than through burning diesel. How exactly are you going to bring the price of energy down? When you have to buy diesel that you don't generate yourself, and you have to buy it from someone, and the price is increasing, but yet still you're expected to work America and pass it on to consumers at a lesser cost. So what does Dickon Mitchell do? He takes away the subsidy, And I think that that makes good economic sense, but he's going to be crucified for it politically.
Other things that can be done, but we wouldn't have time to discuss them now. Perhaps our leaders can start by really investing in renewable energy as opposed to jet setting across the globe for meters, and do what we're doing now, Peter, and use the available technology. That would send the signals to our citizens.
I don't know that, but you lose so much. I've come and done interviews in St. Lucia, and the feel is better. You
Absolutely.
get a better vibe.
I appreciate it.
I like face-to-face, especially after COVID.
Yeah.
I have become a lover of face-to-face meetings again, and I have been going to conferences I haven't gone for a while, and I understand the fact that you could spend 5 minutes with someone and achieve so much more because you've made a physical contact. The point you made about renewables is important. In Barbados, we're struggling with renewables. What people don't understand with renewables is that they're expensive. So they say, well, you can have the sun is free. I agree. But to get the machine to turn the sun into energy, you got to pay money for it. And the amortization on that is going to be pretty brutal. I mean, anyone who has purchased a photovoltaic system for their home understands that you invariably have to take a fairly major loan to be able to afford that. And it is a cost that you have to carry and amortize over a period of time. And I think that on a large level, that's the problem Caribbean islands are facing. People want free energy, and they believe that the renewables are free. The reality is that the renewables carry a cost, and somebody has to pay for it. So we need to get that clear in our minds that there's no free lunch.
Absolutely. Peter, breath of fresh air this morning. There's lots that we can discuss, but I want to stick a pin that we'd like to keep you close for your perspective on these regional matters, and even for your insight looking into how we are progressing here on our 230 square miles we call St. Lucia. Peter, thanks for coming on, and thanks for your insight.
My pleasure. Okay, my pleasure. Good chatting with you, and you take care.
You're most welcome. Peter Wickham, regional pollster, Barbados-born regional pollster, and now based in Paris, France. I'm coming on this morning to discuss with us the recent reshuffle by Prime Minister Mia Mottley over in Barbados, Cabinet Reshuffle. We also talked various matters of regional interest and insight into what's happening here in St. Lucia as well and across the region. Pretty interesting discussion with Peter Wickham, taking us up to the 9 o'clock hour. Tomorrow we will have that Black Hat ticket giveaway. Let me just share the question from now. Has Ancillary, in what year did Ancillary win the Black Hat football tournament? They're on again in the finals this coming Saturday. In what year did Ancillary win the Black Hat final? And if you can answer correctly on tomorrow's program, I'll give you a ticket to the final. Isai, big shout out to you. Thank you always for coming in, and thank you for tuning in, making us your choice. Isai, all happy Tuesday to you, my brother. Stay safe out there as well. Miss Lubo in downtown Cashews in the city seas. These are specials and are always on. We say good morning to you, Miss Lubo. Have yourself a blessed Tuesday. My good friend Kappa in Agad Mondador. You continue to stay safe, Kappa. And Daddy Pato in Upper Jeremy Street, who is always tuned in. Blessed Tuesday to you as well. You, wherever you are, we appreciate you wholeheartedly, and we thank you for making us your choice. We'll be back tomorrow with another exciting program from 6 to 9 on Hot 7 TV. Till then, my name is Shannon LeBon. Have yourselves a wonderful day.